and it's really challenging. Like, it's definitely the most challenging thing I do in terms of media. And I know the likes of, Nick Luck and Lydia Hislop, who are, world-class broadcasters, would say the same thing, because we're in a no-win situation and they're in a no-lose situation. Now, when was the last time any of us was at a circus? I know I certainly haven't been. They're just not really a big thing anymore, whereas zoos, by all accounts, are booming as an attraction. And they realised that people had questions walking in the gate about how the animals were treated and the environment they were in. They listened, they adjusted, made things better for the animals, and they're going the right way. And, that's I love a good cautionary tale. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Karen Luke.
And I'm Mita Osborne.
And welcome to this episode of our podcast, Changing Rein. Our guest today is Kevin Blake, racing broadcaster and breeder.
Kevin, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, because we know you're a very busy man. Obviously, your face is very well known here in Ireland and in the UK from your work at covering racing on TV. You're a blogger, not afraid to say uncomfortable things. You've both hosted podcasts and been podcast guests many times. You also work as racing manager for one of our leading trainers, Joseph O'Brien. And of course, Golden Farm, you're the proud and successful owner of that breeding operation. So you've a lot going on.
People say I wear plenty of hats, but it's kind of having, I suppose I do, but I like to be busy, enjoy what I do, I'm passionate about it, so while things can get a small bit frantic at times, I don't think I'll change too much, so we'll keep the boat afloat for as long as we can.
So one of the things we're really interested here at Changing Rein, Kevin, is people's journeys along the way with their horses, and it sounds like you've had a really diverse kind of journey so far. Are there a couple of sort of really pivotal moments for you that sort of maybe changed things around and led you down a different path?
Loads probably. I'm conscious I do not want to go on about myself too much here. We have so much interesting things to get through, but I'm lucky I get to speak to various different groups of students every year, Irish National Stud course, Flying Start course, and they always seem to be interested in hearing the origin story, because it's pretty unorthodox. But very quickly, I wouldn't be from a racing horsey background at all, and both my parents were dairy farmers, and it was kind of a funny little twist of circumstance that led to me getting my interest piqued. My dad, who wouldn't be a drinker at all, before anyone makes assumptions, but he would go down to the local pub for a few shandies, and we live quite close to Tommy Stacks, a famous racehorse trainer over here, won the Grand National on Red Rum, etc. He was in there one night and he got talking to one of Tommy's staff, and by the end of the night anyway, he'd ended up buying a mare of this chap for 500 quid, and woke up the next morning and said, "Oh Lord, what have I done here?" I think I was about 11 or something like that at the time, and he brought this mare back, didn't even have a stable in the place, and tried to work it out from there. And I just started to take a little bit of an interest. Age of 15 or that, it really started to grab me. The puzzle, the betting side of it was what led me in, really. And it just grew and grew, and I became pretty obsessed with it. Now, to be honest, that sort of brain, when something interests me, I get quite fixated and focused on it, and that just grew and grew. And my academic journey took a few heavy left turns at the back end. Things didn't go quite right for me, and in terms of end of school exams and attempts at college and what have you, and I just found myself in a very kind of probably not a great spot when I was 18 or 19. Started to apply to racing publications and what have you, trying to get some sort of a start. Very, very lucky to get one with the Irish Field, and it just sort of bounced from one thing to the next after that. Plenty of right place, right time stuff. I had started to get involved in the breeding side with myself at home. That's funny the way things work out. Yesterday we had news that a horse called Back in Front had died, and actually it's horrendous after timing, but I actually had the first big betting win of my life on Back in Front. there 20 plus years ago, and I bought my first very cheap mare out of the proceeds of that. So again, it's twists and turns and funny little right place, right times. But fell into broadcasting, fell into a few other things, and we've just tried to keep driving forward. And like I say, I'm just very, very passionate about the animal, about the sport. And it's taken me down some unbelievable roads. I get to broadcast on British terrestrial TV now, which is just kind of slightly mind blowing to me. And yeah, just very, very lucky to do what I really, really love every day. Probably for too many hours every day, but like I say, I wouldn't change too much at the minute.
Have you say, Kevin, unlike some of your colleagues in racing journalism and broadcasting, you are not afraid to take a stand or have an opinion on things. You're active on Twitter. You were involved with Stand Up for Racing last year. You have your blog in Betfair. Always strong opinions. And then I think your involvement with the activities, I suppose, around the Grand National last year probably brought your face and your name to a wider audience. I've read that you described the Grand National as the front line in the battle for racing to retain its social licence. There's battles and there's wars, there's winners and losers. Is that how you see it? Or, what's your take on where racing stands in relation to public interest in racing currently?
Well, I think it's in very good shape. Look, it's not what it was, because we're in a different world now to where we were in the 1960s, when there wasn't very much on TV, and the likes of the Derby and the Grand National were absolutely huge. And as spectator sports, they're absolutely huge. But we're in a different world now. It's way, way more competitive. Like racing still is in a strong space. We take it for granted so much, but to still have so much terrestrial TV coverage is absolutely massive. When you look at, I'm sure we'll touch on some other equine sports, how many of those have lost that. ITV Racing gets plenty of stick from within the bubble, which just blows my mind, because they're expanding. They show so many days. They put so much investment into it. They won a BAFTA award the other night. These are incredible things for racing, and we were definitely guilty of taking it for granted. So look, I think we're in a good space. We still have an excellent platform, but as we'll touch on, when you can't do what you want and be in an animal based sport and have a mainstream platform at the same time, you just can't have both. We've seen that in other sports and other pursuits. You have to move with the world and be conscious of what the world is thinking of you, because with great scrutiny, with great platform comes great scrutiny. And I do believe that with the Grand National, I do see it as a sequence of dominoes, and the Grand National is our biggest event in racing in this part of the world, and it's also statistically our highest risk event in terms of the potential for fatalities, and that's a really uncomfortable place for us to be in. And it can be quite a severe spectacle at times when it goes the wrong way and you get a lot of carnage, and that puts us in a vulnerable spot, because that's the race that the people will focus on. We've seen a lot of some would say watering down of the race in recent decades, not just recent years. But look, I think that's just something we have to cop. That's something we have to do, because if they ever did get the Grand National and get it banned or whatever would happen, the next step after that is, steeplechasing, then it's hurdle racing, then it's 2-year-old racing, then it's flat racing. I think that it is a sequence of dominoes, because the people that tend to be passionately against what we do, I don't think they're going to stop. I don't think we can appease them all that much in terms of their end goals. But as we like to always say, we're not trying to convince those that are passionately on the other side of the argument to us. We're fighting for the middle ground, which is really, really substantial. I think people that don't have a super strong view either way, I think it's our job, and it's what we've really been focusing on for the last year plus in particular, is to better inform those, to be more transparent, and to fight for them, and make them comfortable with what we're doing, because I think that's where the the battle is won and lost. It's not us against the antis. It's the middle ground that'll decide where we're going and what we're doing. And as something I also like to say is, the end doesn't tend to come with one violent swing of an axe. It's an accumulation of many cuts and defeats. And so we need to be battling away in the middle there for those little wins, because otherwise we'll put ourselves in a vulnerable position, I think.
One of the things that I have noticed when a lot of people talk about racing is convincing people what is being done is the right thing to do. Do you see that there's a role for changes to be made in racing?
No, always. We have to be open-minded. We have to be clear-eyed at all times. And there's plenty of things that those of us, heavily within the tent, wouldn't be comfortable with, and we'd like to see addressed. But you do meet resistance. We see it every year with the Grand National debate. Like it was unbelievable, really, post Grand National this year, which I saw as a real victory. A really clean race. Still retained its spectacle. I thought, so many horses competitive for so long, but you had like a really large group of people within the tent that were really unsatisfied with it. They felt that it wasn't the spectacle it used to be. It wasn't the jumping test it used to be, and that it represented, too much ceding of ground to the unappeasable. Look, one can find logic in that, but I couldn't disagree more. I think in particular with the Grand National, we have to be so conscious of how the danger it represents to us. Like it represents a huge opportunity. Like it's a huge shop window for the sport. It would have brought so many people into the sport and picked an interest, for decades and decades. But it also, when you get a bad Grand National, like it's such a danger to what we're doing. And unfortunately, like in my time in racing, which is kind of just over 20 years now, like we have had a few Grand Nationals that just go away from, like, so utterly depressed as to what has transpired, just how ugly the spectacle was. So I'm not going to knock the BHA and Aintree for doing what they're doing. Is it a shadow of what it once was? Is a jumping test? Absolutely, yes. But the key for me is retaining a spectacle that is palatable and exciting to the general once a year race viewer, whilst keep making it or reducing the avoidable risk as much as we can. As we know, we can't eliminate it. No matter what you're doing with horses, you'll always have an element of risk. To me, I think we have to keep an open mind. We have to keep reading the room. We have to keep moving with the line. And like I said, the Grand National just is always going to be a big focus point of all these discussions. So we need to be particularly aware of everything that's being discussed around that all the time,
Is the Grand National an easy target? I'm just thinking you're a media person, so you have a better idea than maybe we have about what gets the journos really excited. Is the Grand National, because of its status, such an iconic race? Is it an easy target to just give the column inches to?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it's a target. It's an excellent target for our opponents too, because they know that week, that build up to that race, when it is on the front pages and the back pages, that's when they will get take up. And we dealt with Animal Rising quite a bit in the last year. They would. I don't think horse racing really forms a major part of their thoughts and their ethos, etc. But they're in the game of media attention and getting their name out there, driving people to their website. And at the end of last year, I recall they put up a social media post basically saying, "This is our year. Look how well we done." And it was just a collage of front pages and screenshots from media appearances. That's how they measure their success. And something like the Grand National, that gives them huge opportunity to get a platform. That's how they measure their success. And Royal Ascot the same, the Derby the same. The common denominator is high visibility, high mainstream attention, and that'll make them a target. And the Grand National is just a particularly tricky one for us because, as mentioned, it is factually our highest risk race. whereas something like the Derby and Royal Ascot, you feel much more comfortable standing over those, because the risk levels are so much tinier in comparison. But the fact that the Grand National is what it is, that it has the platform it has, and hopefully will do for many decades to come, that'll always make it that bit vulnerable and make us that bit more vulnerable because of those realities.
I don't know if racing does this, but if there was a similar collage or montage of racing's how racing got on in this battle, or whatever you like to call it, how do you think it would look, or how would you score racing's response, or is that something you would do? And if you would score it, how has it improved or disimproved over the last, I don't know, 10 years?
I think we've had a rapid phase of improvement there since the Grand National last year. Like, I think that made a lot of people really uncomfortable. It highlighted how unprepared we were, how our communication strategy, the deficiencies it had. And like, that was ultimately like what happened last year. It kicked off there maybe 10 days before the Grand National. A lady from Animal Rising went on Good Morning Britain, and it was basically allowed a kind of a free shot. And the presenters, you don't want to knock the presenters. They don't have a huge amount of domain knowledge, and certainly not enough domain knowledge to counter misinformation or sensationalist statements being made. And we just found ourselves saying, how can this be allowed to happen? How can we not have a representative out there? And that's what started the process of a couple of us putting their hand up and saying, look, we'll do it. We'll go on if no one else can. We'll do it, and that's how it started. But I think that gave the BHA in particular the BHA, a real jolt to say, look, we need a strategy in place here. We need something more structured and cohesive to deal with situations like this. And that has led to the horsePWR website, which I know you'll both be familiar with, and just a wider communication strategy to deal with issues like this when they come about. So I think there's been an awful lot of positivity in the last year in particular.
Yeah, I was going to go back to the horse for a second. First of all, I was going to say, both Karen and I smiled when you mentioned the tent, because we talk about this tent a lot. We feel that everyone who's involved in horse sport is in this big tent. Now, there's different tables and different groups in this tent with possibly different agendas, different ways of going about things. But ultimately, everyone in that tent has the well-being of the horse at their heart. We mightn't agree with the people in the far corner, but like you say, Kevin, there's a lot of people in the middle who we could mix and mingle with and have good conversations. So the tent is kind of a metaphor in the changing rain world. So that was good. But going back to the horse, I suppose there's something around the fact that activist groups like Animal Rising, they would say that they ultimately care for the horse. Everyone involved in racing says we care for our horses. We love our horses. So we actually have some common ground. And I know the advice is don't engage, don't debate, just convince the people nearest to you, convince the middle ground. Is there any merit in having? Or, I mean, you've been there, you've had these debates. I know they've been on air, and that's kind of a charged environment. But is there merit in some sort of private debates between the more extreme elements of this tent and the?
Well, look, you do no harm, Mita, but I think really these people, these Animal Rising, would say in particular, that I don't think they have any great interest in that. I think they're in the business of media attention. And look, there is a debate to be had in terms of how we should respond to that, and whether going on television with them legitimizes them. And that maybe that's something we shouldn't do. That's something that's said quite a bit, and that if we just ignored them, they might go away a bit faster. But I just would always use the example of that Good Morning Britain bit prior to last year's Grand National, when you let them on there with a free rein, the presenters in almost all cases just won't have that domain knowledge to challenge them, and they can come out with pretty much anything, and they're not going to get pulled on it. And because everyone in racing then gets so upset about what's being said, it ends up giving the whole thing fuel, and before you know it, it's got 1 million views on Twitter, and that's no help to anyone. So my view is, I think you have to go on there and give the other side. And it's really challenging. Like, it's definitely the most challenging thing I do in terms of media. And I know the likes of, Nick Luck and Lydia Hislop, who are, world class broadcasters, would say the same thing, because we're in a no-win situation and they're in a no-lose situation. If we make a misstep or give a wrong number or blurt out something inappropriate, we're speaking for racing, even though we're not. We're seen as speaking for racing, whereas our opposition can come on and basically wheel off a load of, misinformation, made up stats, etc. And they don't really care if they get called on it. They don't really care if they get, made look a bit foolish. I don't think that really matters to them. They're just happy to be on there and happy to have their group's name being given prominence. So they're challenging, but look, I think we have to do it. I think we have to go and give the other side. And it's challenging because you spend most of them, correcting and countering rather than putting forward, positive points from our point of view, of which there are so many. And that's a challenge as well, Mita. You speak about the tent, because when those of us within the tent, so much is assumed. So we know so much about what we're doing, everyday assumptions that would never get spoken of in terms of our relationship with horses and the standard of care, and just what to us would be very simple things, but they wouldn't be simple knowns to the audience, and we maybe don't do enough to put some of those things out there, because simple things, and we all have these discussions with people around us, and often make the point to people, if they're feeling sick or they fall over and hurt themselves, and like, right, how long do you reckon it's going to take you to see a doctor? And they'll say whatever, a day, 2 days. They say, well, if one of my horses gets a bang out in the field and gets a cut, I guarantee you I'll have a vet here within 10 minutes. It's just like people just don't. Yeah. Would a lot of people just wouldn't appreciate the ridiculous level of care these animals get every day of their lives, and like I say, we take it as a given, as an assumption, because that's just what we know of thoroughbreds and their lives, but we probably don't push that out there enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things that sparked my just a thought as you were speaking about engaging with some of the animal rights people is, does it always have to be someone who's that far down? Like, we're probably talking about a spectrum and of where people sit, when we talk about the tent and people sitting in different corners and things. Do you think there's a role to speak to people who perhaps have concerns about horse welfare and racing, but perhaps are a little less extreme, but potentially have some legitimate concerns?
Oh yeah, like that's the middle ground we talk about. Those are the ones we really want to talk to. But I suppose in terms of what ends up going out in the media, only the most extreme are going to want to go on to television to have a debate about it. So I think social media's got a big role to play. That's why I was so personally, and I was far from alone, obviously, that this horsePWR website I think is so valuable. In terms of not just the resource that is sitting there now for anyone that is curious, or for being a place that we can direct people to, but when that grows and it develops, and it's still quite early stages, it's going to have such an amount of resource there in terms of information that's in image files that can be easily copied and pasted and stuck on social media when questions arise. Why are horses euthanized when they break their legs? Just a common one. We had a horrendous case at Chester during the week of that happening. 10 strides after a horse won a Derby trial, he had a catastrophic breakdown, and it was very, very grim and upsetting for all involved. But again, those questions come up. Why couldn't you take him to the hospital? Why couldn't you fix him? And like, the answers are very well established, but they're not necessarily put out there well enough to stop those questions being asked. They never will stop, but certainly reduce them. And I think once horsePWR is fully powered up, the idea and the ambition is to have like really comprehensive, accessible answers, multimedia answers to those tricky questions that do get asked quite a bit. so that we can inform that middle ground and make them a bit more comfortable, and say, look, sometimes even when money is no object, in cases like, St. Nicholas Abbey and Barbaro, where they tried to fix horses that were worth tens of millions, that had catastrophic breakdowns, that it just didn't have a happy ending, because that's the level of difficulty you face in dealing with those injuries. And that's why the right thing to do in the vast majority of cases is to euthanize, and if we can get that information out there in a very transparent way, it'll help people better understand some of the things we do and why we do them, and that it's not, it's not, it always is with the best interests of the horse in mind,
Yeah, I must say I was pleased to see the horsePWR portal come out. Yeah, there's lots of good stuff. It's very visually appealing. I did wonder, and I'm sure this is a work in progress, that the FAQs and the facts and the answers are not referenced, as in there aren't scientific. The backup is not there on the site now. That probably 10 or 15 years ago, that would not have bothered me too much. I was very much in the bubble, the day-to-day bubble of racing, having been exposed to the world of academia and the rigor of the world of academia, where you really can't make a statement without having the evidence, like the verifiable evidence to back it up. I just think there's a trick being missed there, and I hope it will be addressed. And of course, the problem with that is science evolves; nothing is ever settled. But there's definitely robust scientific evidence out there, and I think for people who want to dig that little bit deeper, I think it's a pity that it's not readily accessible on the site. But look, it's definitely a good starting place.
Yeah, and that will come either, like we've had that discussion and discussed the importance of it, because like you say, like this is ultimately a website, created by the BHA, and you have to be conscious that there will be cynical eyes looking, and you will get a response of, well, of course they'd say that, where's they show us, prove it, and that will come. I suppose just the thing with horsePWR was there was an awful lot of time spent accumulating the expertise and the funding to basically get it going, and they felt that they had to have something in place prior to the Grand National. So what you see is very much a phase one, a bare bones almost of what it will ultimately be, and that aspect of it. And I've certainly raised that with them, that it's important that it is all vouched for. It is that if someone wants to go deeper, if they're not satisfied with what they're given in the nice, clean, accessible line or two addressing the question, that they can go deeper, and it's easy for them to go deeper and to read more and to get even more informed. I fully agree. Like we got to do that, and I think that horsePWR will get there, hopefully sooner rather than later.
And I sort of can't help but notice, Kevin, that some of the way that you describe it is a bit like it's a battle, like it's almost like a war that has to be won, and that people are looking at a cynical way of looking at the site. What about people who perhaps have worked in animal welfare and actually look at that site and think, hang on a minute, I feel like some of the stuff just isn't quite right, as opposed to just being cynical and wanting to tear it down? Do you think there's room to engage more with the science and the scientists and the people who actually genuinely care and also potentially have something to contribute?
Not always, Karen, because look, someone said it to me, like doing what I do in the media, like you do get a lot of criticism and a lot of scrutiny, and plenty of people disagree with you. And a colleague said to me years ago, and it stuck with me. He said you should always listen to your critics, because if they're taking the time to criticize, it's usually because they care. And there's not always, but there is truth, and there's constructiveness to be taken from what's being said, even if it is critical. And look, that's absolutely the case. We should be, we have plenty of critical friends, and we should be listening to them, because that's ultimately what makes what you're doing stronger, I think, in whatever you're doing in life. If you just barrel on thinking you know best all the time. It's just your end product is never going to be as good as it can be. So I couldn't agree more. Because and look, there would be plenty of disagreement now in some of the content and some of the presentation of the information on the horsePWR website. Like it would have been an internal debate as to what was the best way to do it and what wasn't. So I think those discussions are ongoing. And someone said something very good to me the other day. What was it? He said the definition of good leadership is finding someone smart that disagrees with you and listening to them. And I thought that stuck with me.
I suppose I find myself quite personally invested in this. Karen and I have lots of discussions, and we've had evolving discussions on it. And I think possibly one of the things is that in racing we emphasize the care, and health is also always equated with welfare. They're really healthy. Look at the coat gleaming, and he wouldn't be performing at his best if he wasn't well looked after. And I think we haven't moved enough with the times in terms of how the horse thinks about all of this. That's the kind of new frontier in animal welfare in general, and it's been embraced in other animal sectors and possibly not so much in the horse world in general, and possibly racing in particular, because we are so hidebound by tradition. And look, I love tradition as much as the next person, but I think sometimes we just haven't thought enough. And I don't think it's true malevolence or anything like that. I think it's just no one has actually posed that question. What do you think the horse thinks about this?
Yeah, like I assume, I think that mindset probably has its origins in the concept of a work animal. I think that's probably where we're coming from. And I come from a farming background, and where you ultimately raise animals for inevitable slaughter. And the thing with farmers that I've always found, even though when you put it like that, it sounds quite severe, but in my personal experience and experience with so many other farmers, the whole notion of it is that's the deal. The animal doesn't get a say in it, but it's the farmer's duty to give that animal the highest quality of life, to get them to that point, because it's in a mutual interest. It's good for the animal, and what's good for the animal is good for their health, is good for their physical well-being, their physical development, etc. And that's the sort of the basis that you operate on. It's a little bit different when we're dealing in a sport like racing, but I think there are some elements of that working animal, which they ultimately are, and like the way I suppose so many people think of it is that we have this unwritten, unspoken agreement with our thoroughbreds. They don't get involved in the conversation, obviously, but that from the moment they're conceived, we will give them the very best of treatment, to keep them mentally and physically as well as we can, to maximize the chances of them realizing their athletic potential, and that they will benefit from whatever it may be, 2.5 years of world-class care until it comes time for them to prove what they can do, and then they have to run for 1,000 meters, 1,200 meters, 1,400 meters as hard as they can to show us what they can do, and on we go from there. But the area then that you're moving into, I suppose, becomes a little bit trickier, because you get into, and this is the challenges that tend to be presented to you by some of the opponents, in that choice. Well, the horse didn't have a choice. But my response is always to them, well, you haven't dealt with thoroughbreds very much if you say they haven't had a choice, because if a 500 kilo thoroughbred doesn't want to do something, they're not going to do it. We have our tricks and our horsemanship to try and get them to do what we want to do, but ultimately, if they don't want to move, then they're not going to move. So there is some choice involved, but you get into slightly trickier territory there. There's no doubt about that.
I have to contradict you, sorry, Kevin, because you can 100% make a horse do something it doesn't want to do, and people do it every day. I hear that line a lot, and that's just not fact. I deal with horses every day too, and we absolutely can, through all sorts of techniques and training and learning theory, make animals do things they don't want to do.
If they really, really don't want to do it, it's quite challenging.
It's challenging. It's challenging. And the other thing about horses is that I think all of us underestimate is that they are literally hardwired to cooperate. So if they possibly can cooperate with us, they absolutely will. And it's why we can ride them. It's why we can race them. And I think that makes them vulnerable, because we can get them to do things they don't want to do. Now, I'm not saying that people do that in a malevolent way necessarily, but I think it's a little bit disingenuous to sort of suggest that we get them to do things, that they have a choice, because they ultimately don't have a choice in most of the things that happen in their lives. You even mentioned it yourself about the farm animals. In terms of, they don't get a say. But that's not, I don't think we have to have that debate about choice, because I don't think that's what most people in the middle have the problem with. I think people in the middle want all of us that own horses and ride horses and use horses to make sure that we do it in a way where the horse ends up having a good life. And of course, health is part of that good life, but so is their mental well-being. And I think that's the part where I think people can see, like we can see how beautifully cared for the horses are, and they're amazing specimens of good health often. But it's that mental side, I think, that people struggle with. And I think that's where the opportunity is to make the changes and see if we can enhance that good life that we want to give them. So sorry to interject and contradict you.
The question I'd ask Karen, though, is if you want to take that to that sort of degree, is anything we do with horses compatible with that, with the notion of choice? In terms of, I suppose what I was referring to was in terms of the act of racing. If a horse wants to race or doesn't want to gallop, they won't. The horses, some of them make the track and we see them refuse to race, etc. But I suppose most of them just don't get to the track if they have that strong an objection to the basics of what we ask them to do. They're never going to get that far along the line. But if we want to pair that back to, does a horse like having a bit in its mouth, or does it like having a saddle on its back or a rider on their back? Is the inevitable conclusion of that line of thought that we shouldn't be doing anything with them.
Sorry, what I was saying is I think if we try and go down that idea of choice, I don't think most people are saying everything that they do has to be a choice. I just wanted to sort of, I guess, counteract that, saying that you can't make a horse to do something that it doesn't want to do. But pushing that aside and going back to the whole idea of choice, I don't think we need to ask the horse's permission for everything that we want to do, like you were saying, put a saddle on its back, because that does really leave us in sort of, where do we go from there sort of thing. Mm-hmm. What I was trying to sort of articulate, perhaps not very well, was that many people can accept that we are going to use horses, but I think what concerns them is, whilst they might get terrific physical care and have good physical well-being, what people are now starting to be concerned about is that mental side of us using the horse. And I think there are so many great opportunities out there to make improvements that would allow horses to have a much better time as a racehorse or an equestrian horse or a kid's riding pony. So I guess that's what I was trying to articulate. And are there changes and things that we could do to enable a better sort of mental life as opposed to just the physical side of things?
I think most of what we do with thoroughbreds is so focused on, not just physical well-being, but mental well-being. Like, I know everything here is just set up so that the horses are just relaxed and stress-free as much as a thoroughbred ever can be. And I think that would be common across the industry. Can we do things better? Always. And I think almost everyone, I'd imagine, is always open to that. And finding out better ways to do things, more efficient way to do things that are better for the horses. So I think that'll always be a focus point. it's what's the term I'm looking for? It's a performance-based business, and it's in everyone's interest that's involved in thoroughbreds for their thoroughbred to be as healthy and as happy as possible. Because if they're not healthy and happy, they're not going to perform. They're not going to generate a financial return if that's what the goal is. So everyone is aligned on the horse's health and happiness. In almost all cases, we know there's bad actors, etc., in every business, unfortunately. But I think the vast majority of right-minded people are aligned along the lines that you speak about there. But I fully agree. We have to be open to doing things better, to getting better results, because ultimately we're all pushing in that same direction, I think.
I saw a graph recently about the amount of research being done on equine welfare over the last 15 or 20 years, and it trundled along very quietly, and it's just suddenly it's exploded. So there's a huge amount of really, really good work being done within the tent of animal welfare, which is not about abolishing horses. It's about what can we do for the horses in our care to maximize their quality of life, and whether that's improved socialization or whether it's forage access. But there are all sorts of areas that and that's what kind of gives me hope, that we have headroom. We're not perfect. Gosh, if we were perfect, well then we might as well give up, because the critics would be right. But actually, we're not perfect. But there's loads we can do. So I suppose for me, it's about being open to these ideas, and I hope that's kind of one of the things we're trying to do here, Karen, isn't it? Just to spark these. We call it change thought. We're just saying, thoughts that.
No, and it's great. We got to be challenged. We can't be afraid of being challenged, even if it's uncomfortable. Because these are conversations that we should be having. These are the conversations that get us all thinking in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
And like I saw a really interesting piece there a little while ago, in terms of it was to do with racing, but it offered an interesting comparison between how the world of circuses and zoos, how their reactions to greater scrutiny differed, and how the end results that those areas got. I'm sure you're familiar with the piece. It was quite interesting. Essentially, circuses with regard to the use of animals, they didn't listen. They didn't move. They kept the blinkers on and tried to keep doing what they were doing. Whereas zoos, as a group, I suppose, very much did listen and made a lot of changes in light of scrutiny they were getting. And now, when was the last time any of us was at a circus? I know I certainly haven't been. They're just not really a big thing anymore, whereas zoos, by all accounts, are booming as an attraction. And they realised that people had questions walking in the gate about how the animals were treated and the environment they were in. They listened, they adjusted, made things better for the animals, and they're going the right way. And that's I love a good cautionary tale. I think that there is plenty to take from that, and I'd like to think we're much more zoo-like than circus-like as an industry with our thoroughbreds. But it's an interesting example to look at, I think.
Kevin, do you take an interest in other horse sports, or do you watch what's going on there? I mean, we seconded badminton on Sunday, which was great, Lucy Latta. But do you take an interest?
I don't follow them closely, but I try to be aware of what's going on, and I was aware of that. And actually, it just came to me there this morning. I saw an interview with Robbie Power, former national hunt jockey. Very prestigious show jumping background, and he was talking about badminton, and he made a comment that the jumping test that they present makes the Grand National look like a children's pony club now, which is fair comment. I've seen what they jump at badminton, but I thought it was interesting. I went looking this morning because, like I say, I wouldn't follow it. I didn't watch it live. I went to check what kind of mainstream TV coverage it had. I believe it just had a bit on BBC on Sunday. The vast majority of it wasn't shown. And, we also saw that with show jumping. Show jumping it was before my time, but it used to be absolutely gigantic in Ireland on terrestrial TV. And it was something that really engaged the public. But they've lost all that. And it sounds like badminton gets a very small shop window now. So like I think I mentioned it earlier, you know, I don't think you can do what you want and also expect, you know, a giant mainstream shop window. You know, badminton, you know, is an unbelievable jumping challenge for a horse. But if you put that in front of 10 million people, like we do with the Grand National, you know, how would it be perceived? You know, and I speaking from ignorance now, I have no idea what the equine fatality rate is in those pursuits. I assume it's very small, like it is in ours. But you know, if a horse did do a somersault and break its neck on live TV, you know, over a particularly challenging obstacle, you know, how does that play in the public eye? You know, that'd be queries I'd have, and I'm not knocking it whatsoever. I'm just being hypothetical, I suppose, and in terms of you know, with the familiarity with how the Grand National tends to play in situations like that. So it's interesting.
So one of the things that Misha and I love is to do a bit of, you know, speculation. We in our systems world, we call it scenario planning, and it's actually a technique that's been used for a long time to sort of help find solutions to tricky problems, which I guess potentially when we've got horses in sport, that can be a tricky problem. So in our scenario, we're going to pretend we're in Australia, and in Australia, the Melbourne Cup, the numbers are dropping in terms of people going to the Cup, and from most accounts, it seems like that's due to people being concerned about horse welfare. So let's pretend the government has decided to have a bet each way. I thought you'd appreciate the betting reference. And they're not going to ban racing, but they're going to force some change. And so you've got to come up with some initiative to improve horse welfare. So if you were the policy advisor to the government, what would you recommend as giving the best bang for the buck in terms of improving horse welfare?
Or if it's going to be an Australia-specific example, I actually have quite a quick answer.
Oh, well, you can pretend that it's in Ireland.
No, I thought it was quite interesting because I'd be very aware of Australian racing and what's going on there. I follow it reasonably closely, and the trainer I work for, Joseph O'Brien, would have had quite a bit of success down there. We watch things very closely and how it's moving and the challenges they're facing, and they've obviously taken made some quite stark changes there with regard to veterinary scrutiny around their big races in particular. I thought it was interesting that when the Melbourne Cup was reviewed, following again, I suppose a tough renewal of it a few years ago, there was X amount of recommendations made, and the vast majority of them were put in place. But one they didn't was a call for the ground to be artificially softened via watering. Because you will find a correlation, you know, across the racing world of fatality rate with firmness of the ground, and I thought it was interesting that they didn't choose to go down that road. So if it was relevant to Australia and the pressure was really on, I think that might be something I'd explore.
So what if we twisted the scenario a little bit? What if the focus wasn't so much on fatalities? If there was something more fundamental or more basic? You know, is there something else that you could imagine that you could think, hey, you know what, this is something that people would really value, as I can see how this is going to make the horse's life better.
Like I think there's a trend there for increased independent veterinary scrutiny before races. You know, particularly at the higher levels, we see it now at all, you know, most of the big meetings. You know, I think that will spread. I think that's happening. You know, we had an announcement in Ireland the other day about investment being made like imminently on standardised trot up areas at all Irish tracks that'll be in place, I think, within the next year, which is fantastic. You know, I think that can only be a good thing. You know, I think that area has moved a lot in the last few years. You know, I know it wouldn't be universally popular because, you know, the nature of horses, a lot of work has to be done. If you have a horse that maybe isn't the greatest mover, but is sound, you know, I know a lot of work has to be done with providing, you know, videos of that horse, you know, from weeks before the race, so that when the horse is trotted up prior to the race, and the vet might see some unevenness, that they can see that this is normal. This isn't something that's come about, in the last day or two or whatever. I think that independent scrutiny makes what we're doing more robust. And while it can lead to some very frustrating situations, and there has been some on very high profile stages of horses being withdrawn, close to race time because the independent vets weren't satisfied. I think it makes it a bit easier for us to stand over what we're doing if that level of independent scrutiny is there. Even while it will inevitably cause some frustrations, etc., I suspect that will become more widespread, and it will be leaned on a little bit more. So I think in saying that, I think there's probably an element of pushing an open door. I suspect it's moving that way anyway, but I think that can only be a positive, because when we do get a catastrophic breakdown on track, unfortunately, if they have been independently assessed beforehand, I think it makes people a bit more comfortable that, look, every step was taken to spot a pre-existing injury if it was there, and nothing was found.
Can I be cheeky and ask one more? So the reason why I want to do this one last one is because of the research that you mentioned about the zoos and the circuses. So there's a paper that I read a few months ago, and we've actually invited the author to come onto the podcast in the future. And they did some surveys of zoo visitors, and what they found was that the visitors could actually identify the psychological well-being of the zoo animals better than they could identify the physical well-being, which is really interesting. And what they realised, the zoos realised, was that having unhappy animals was actually an existential threat to the zoos. And so they put in lots of things in place to make their animals happier in the zoos, which you alluded to before. So if we take, the answers that you've given me to the scenario so far are mostly focused on the physical health of the horse. So given what we know about what happened to the zoos and the circuses, and the fact that people notice the psychological well-being of animals better than the physical well-being, what could we do in racing? What could you imagine that we could do in racing and the bit that people see, which is the actual race, that people might notice? Or maybe it's something that you do behind the scenes, but that people would still notice that, hey, you know what, these horses actually don't look too unhappy. They look pretty happy to me.
Ooh, that's challenging, I suppose, because like you say, the vast majority of what people see is on the track.
Yeah.
And like, I'm just imagining scenarios again, I suppose, like if an equivalent of a zoo goer came into a racing stable, saw a horse at the back of its box weaving or something, and clearly not looking overly happy, that's clearly not a happy sight for anyone, and no one wants that. So what can you do? Like, I do feel at times that we don't do a good enough job of showcasing some of the behind the scenes stuff. We're definitely better. Yeah. I don't know. And then you say, well, is it really much good just to put the sunny side out the whole time? When we know it's not always sunny side out. I know from having the farm here, we love to put up pictures of fluffy foals looking happy and that, but we know it's not always. They do get sick. They do have challenges, and we don't tend to put that out there all that much. And sometimes I think that it would. I'm going to give a random example. Clarkson's Farm. Have you watched Clarkson's Farm?
No, I want to, but I haven't.
I just started watching the later season. I think that has been really interesting for farming in Britain, because it doesn't hide from some of the more challenging things and some of the slightly depressing things at times. Not just with regard to animals, but with the pursuit in the main. I think in racing we're quite self-conscious, and we put sunny side out the whole time. We only show people the best of ourselves. And I think sometimes people will get a better appreciation for what's going on if you show some of the other side of it, And I think Clarkson's Farm does that really well, and they don't hide from it, and it's all done in a humorous setting, and it's entertainment ultimately. But because they showed the other side of it, I think I read a good piece there. It was just after the first season came out. It labelled Clarkson's Farm as the best thing to happen in British farming in 25 years, because it made people, through the medium of entertainment, so much more aware of the difficulties of what farmers do, the financial challenges, the issues with that you can have with animals, in terms of problems. It just made people so much more cognizant of the full reality, the full picture, rather than just sunny side up the whole time, which we probably do. I veered a little bit on you there now, but hopefully you can see the direction I'm moving in.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And, sometimes when you do that, when you open up your yard or your barn or whatever, and it can be an innocent question from a visitor.
Dermot.
You've just ruined the whole thing.
No, this is the beauty of podcasts now. This has to stay in.
Hi, Dermot.
As long as he doesn't come in now plugging anything Nace, Royal Ascot Trial State, Nace will be fine.
He nearly would. Photobombing by Dermot. Yes, as I said, sometimes it's the innocent question, which has no agenda, but it's just an innocent question from someone who doesn't know very much, who can actually, switch on that light bulb and think, oh, I never thought of it like that. So yeah, it is good. It's that, and I'm not even. It's not even scrutiny. It's just observation. It's just innocent, independent observation can often give you ideas that you would. I suppose it's back to our system thinking there, Karen. If you get enough perspectives on a problem, you have a better chance of sorting it. So I'd like to answer the scenario.
Definitely.
Of course, yeah.
And I'll put this in the Irish context. I just think, and it arises from a previous podcast guest that we had on that made me think about this. If, as a condition of your getting your license, a trainer's license, you had to have adequate turnout area for the horses in your stable, because I think a lot of trainers struggle with that. They just do not have. Now, I don't know how you would implement it. It's putting a barrier up for people who are already in business. I can see all the negatives, but gosh, it would be such a win for the horses. If it just was part of licensing, you can't have a license to train horses unless you provide adequate turnout opportunities for those horses.
Well, I think what's been a really interesting trend in the last few years that I've seen, and I don't know who was the first to do it. Maybe there wasn't the first. Maybe people always did it, but I've seen much more of it in recent years. Gordon Elliott is one. Barry Connell has built a new yard, with the same thing. Joseph has done it now. They've built blocks of stables that have that are half and half. It's half stable, half a turnout area on wood chip. They most of the time they'll have it swung open there, and the horse has the choice whether to be in the stable proper or out the back with fresh air. And I know Joseph built a block of them, 2 years ago, and he built another block very quickly because he felt the horses were really benefiting from it. At the start, it was horses that you might have had a reason to do that. They might have been inclined towards bursting blood vessels or had some respiratory difficulties. But I think Gordon Elliott has found similar, that the horses are just very happy when they have that choice. And look, this is an economic thing; not everyone can afford to do that. But I think it's very interesting that we're seeing more and more of it. And I think that's from an outside perspective, I think that it looks right, and I always find it quite interesting. I've got a shed here, we'll call it an open shed that mares live in, and I burst out a wall and put a gate out that leads directly into a paddock, and I just always find it so interesting. Big lovely open, well ventilated shed, but if you leave that gate open and give the horses the choice, it could be absolutely hammering down with rain, grim, horrific day, they'll almost always be outside. They do like being outside when you give them the choice that we talked about. I always thought that was quite interesting. So that is just not logical. It is hammering with rain. It's cold. Yeah. Why would you want to come in? Yeah. But there you go.
Yeah. Kevin,
am I allowed to answer the scenario?
Oh, go on.
This wasn't planned at all. I just thought, well, if Meta's going to have a turn, I want to have a turn. What about if you've got people who are worried about the psychological well-being of the horse, and it's what people see, and it's an existential threat? Could we get rid of the whip?
Is the world moving that way already? No, look, I think it has a role. Look, in terms of perception, is it ever going to be your friend? No. But in terms of its role in being the trigger that helps us to ultimately to achieve what we're looking to achieve, which is maximize the athletic potential of the horse. That's the trigger that we've used to signal that we're seeking maximum effort, for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I would be slightly fearful that if you removed it for encouragement, that there may be unintended consequences. Would it make it a more palatable visual spectacle? Absolutely, no question. It's a difficult thing to justify to a wider audience. Sweden have generally been way ahead of everyone else in terms of the measures they've taken within racing, and they haven't allowed the stick for for decades. We've been in a watering down process in our part of the world and in Australia as well, obviously, for quite a while now, in terms of the number of permitted strikes being reduced. I think that's been beneficial, but in terms of taking it away altogether for encouragement, I'd be afraid of the unintended consequences.
One of our podcast guests, Dr. Andrew McLean, who's doyens of learning theory, equitation science, he has suggested that there might be other ways of teaching cues to a horse that they would understand as being the signal to accelerate. So there might be other ways of getting the response that you talk about. Look, I'm not a rider, I wouldn't know a cue would have hit me in the face, but I just think I thought that was interesting when he said that. Again, like everything else we've discussed, there's headroom. There's opportunities to look at things differently.
You absolutely could. You could cue the same thing to something else apart from the whip.
So but I think that probably comes back to the formation training of these horses.
Yeah,
that's where it would have to come
this is it. Yeah.
I was just thinking existential threat, change of practice.
Yeah,
and we've had plenty of people within racing that are quite anti-whip, and the usage of it now has been reduced to, we're approaching bare minimum now. In France, it's down to 4 strikes.
Thank you, Kevin. You've been amazing, and thank you so much for being so generous.
Thanks, Sarah. I don't know. I've been veering violently on you now, but hopefully there's something useful in it.
Look, Kevin, it's been an absolute pleasure. You are, as I've said at the start, a very, very busy man. So we were lucky to get you for the time we got you. We covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate your candor and your frankness, and we look forward to getting this out there so the wider world can hear it.
Hey everyone, it's Karen. Thanks for listening, and we really hope you loved the show today. You can support the show by liking and subscribing, and of course, if you write a review, that will help other people find the show. We are always looking for ways to make the show better, so if you have an idea for the show, have a question you would like us to answer, or there's someone you'd like us to interview, then please send us an email to team@changingrain.com.au. We would love to hear from you, and thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.